talk very briefly about the museum. Most of you are aware of some of the things that have been occurring. Among those things we've been working on are trying to get air conditioning in here, which obviously we just got some of it hooked up and not enough to get it cool enough. Also, having the doors and windows open probably didn't help too much air conditioning. But we also have a new exhibit that just has gone in this year. For those that haven't seen it, it's arts and entertainment. And it includes film. We have a nice video, interactive video in there. It includes toys and games. It includes music. It includes paintings. It includes trench art. For those that don't know trench art is something that dates back to the Napoleonic Wars in World War I, where they were in the trenches and actually producing art. They would do paintings and so forth, and that became known as trench art. But the definition has been expanded some more to include any art produced by an active duty military person while in an isolated duty situation. So it might be on Loran Station, on icebreaker in the Arctic or the Antarctic, that sort of art. So it also includes things like Nantucket lightship baskets. As far as we're concerned, that's trench art. Trench art, we have a Nantucket lightship basket, an original one made in 1880. They're invaluable. They're made by a sailor on a lightship back in that time. We also have what I think many of you that have been in the sailing understand marlin spike seamanship. Marlin spike seamanship is when you make something fancy work. Knots, just simple knots, are part of marlin spike seamanship. But also doing rope tying on railings, and that's all marlin spike seamanship. We actually have a marlin spike. This would be marlin spike. Tom, you made this? Tom made this from a, this is a glass ball from the Pacific, from Attu? Marcus. This is Loran Station. So we consider it a combination of marlin spike seamanship and trench art. Floated ashore there when he was servicing the Loran stations out there. And they did some, what would be marlin spike seamanship, wrapping this in line. So that's one, and his brother was here. Oh yes. Sorry, drop. This is a stick. Well, it's much more than a stick. This is a piece of driftwood that came ashore. Go ahead, you tell me.
Called Diamond Willow. Yeah.
Diamond Willow.
And I got it on Hope, Alaska.
So again, we consider this trench art, isolated duty, some artwork, and his brother then did the finish work on it, including some scrimshaw. You did scrimshaw too with the tip. So these are things, we get stuff in here all the time that is invaluable in a lot of different ways. Invaluable, frankly, value-wise. We've got some things, $10,000, $20,000. We've just got a Lao gun that has that kind of value to it. Other things that just have a lot of sentimental value and Coast Guard value. So that's encouraging. The bad part of this is we get a lot of stuff in, so we try to be careful with what we can accept. Our basement would be completely filled up, which it pretty much is now. If you haven't seen already, either this evening or come back some other time, see the exhibit on arts and entertainment. It's interactive. I mean, if you look at some films, just the trailers for films like The Finest Hours, The Perfect Storm, The Guardian, those. But there have been 150 films that have been made about Coast Guard, at least that many. That's just a rough count. After we finish with, I shouldn't put that way. I was going to say after we're finished with Sally, we'll go inside, and I've got, Sally, may ask you to help us inside. We've got the cake to cut, and all of you, as I said, need to eat some cake or at least take some with you to help celebrate Coast Guard Day. This is, I think, 90% or maybe 100% of you are aware that August 4th, which is tomorrow, is the Coast Guard's birthday. It's when Washington signed legislation in 1790 to create the Revenue Cutter Service, which was our predecessor organization. So if you want to take some cake instead of celebrating until tomorrow, take some home with you and then put a candle in it and celebrate it. 234th birthday. That said, Sally Snowman I've known for 30 years now. I think it's almost exactly 30 years. I was in command of Group Boston, coincidentally in Boston. And she was involved in the auxiliary. Then shortly after I left, she was involved some with Boston Light as an auxiliarist, but then about 7 years later, took over as lightkeeper out there. And becoming a lightkeeper, the short history of Boston Light, which we'll go through, but short history is there was direction from Kennedy to keep it a lighthouse manned forever. Well, he died forever, became much shorter than so she was the first lightkeeper, first female lightkeeper of Boston Light in its history dating back to 1760 when it was built, first lit. And then by retiring last December 31st, over 6 months ago, she became the Coast Guard's last official lightkeeper. So she is both the first woman at Boston Light, not the first woman lightkeeper, there have been many lightkeepers over the years, but first woman lightkeeper at Boston Light. So it's really an honor and a privilege to have Sally come down and talk to us. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Sally. Thanks for coming.
Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here. We're so glad that we got invited. This is my husband, Jay.
My other shirt says Keeper's Husband, and I remind people, there haven't been very many, the only Keeper's Husband now, but there never were very many, because usually it would be a widow or a daughter that already knew how to tend the lights. If they were politically accepted, that's how they got the job.
And so this particular PowerPoint presentation is called The First and the Last. So as you just heard, that Boston Light had been manned from 1716 until the 31st of December 2023. And there had been 70 keepers over those 307 years. The first 69 were all men. So I came on board in 2003 as the first female keeper. And I'm civilian. As you know, the history of how we came with a lighthouse service, and then it merged with life-saving services together, and came into the Coast Guard, and moved right into where we are tonight to talk about what it has been like to be a 21st century female lighthouse keeper in the first established light station in colonial America. And if you notice the language, first established light station, not the oldest, because it's not the oldest. The oldest was down in Sandy Hook, New Jersey, built in 1764. The British didn't blow that one up. They shot at it, but they didn't blow it up. They blew up Boston Light, and it had to be rebuilt back in 1783. But we found out that the first 9 to 14 feet is the original, but it's still not the first that's still standing.
I have no problem with the people down in Sandy Hook telling them they had too many Tories, they got to keep their lighthouse.
And for those who can see the screen here, this was taken in December of 2023. And the photographer is an international renowned photographer that lives in the Boston area. And Boston Globe hired him to take pictures of me out here. Well, did you know how long we had to wait for the weather to permit the Coast Guard to bring me out there? And he wanted me on the island so he could take pictures from the boat. So it's like, I'm not supposed to be on the island by myself. Well, I was for about 2 hours. And so he went out and said, I want you to go up at the top of the tower and you know, wave your hanky. And it was 25 knot winds up there. And I'm trying to hold my dress down. I'm trying to hold my bonnet on. And so finally, I don't know how I communicated. I think I just left going outside and went down, and he figured it out that I wasn't going to do that anymore. In the pictures that he took there, none of them were good enough. So he said, okay, let's have you up on walks. So, you know, I'm walking along. He said, can you get up on that one there?
Your patent leather shoes.
My patent leather shoes and my costume. So I said, turn off the camera, because this isn't going to be a pretty sight. And then coming back down again. And I love this picture because it really depicts the first and the last. It's with my essence of saying, oh my gosh, bringing closure to 207 years. And And I had the privilege to do that. I tear up just thinking about that. So moving right along, here we have U.S. Coast Guard Light Station Boston. And by the way, the Light Station Boston, I don't know if you've been following the history of transfers of lighthouses across the country, that we have the Lighthouse Preservation Act of 2000, and we have approximately 150 lighthouses that have already been successfully transferred. And Boston Light is on the list. And when I got hired back in 2003, it was supposed to be for 18 months to 2 years. So at the time, I was a college professor at Curry College. And I went to them and said, how many years of leave of absence can I have? And they said, oh, you would have 4. And I said, oh, easy world. I'll only be gone for 2 years. Well, 20 years later, I retired. And what happened is the Park Service was going to take ownership in either July or August of 2004. At the last minute, they backed out. To this day, even the Coast Guard side doesn't know what went wrong. And so I have the longest standing federal temp job across the country for 20
But we need
years.
somebody to take and collaborate that. It may not be true, but it's certainly right up there.
And so what happened is, once we had 9/11, the Coast Guard realized that they needed to have those 3 active duty personnel that were on the island. They needed them for port security. And so they went to Congress and said, hey, can we make that position a civilian one? And Congress said, okie dokie. So they did a search the entire country. I heard it was about 1,000 people applied. At the last minute, Jay's command to put in my application, I won the Coopy Dog. Now, you know that it was only going to be for 18 months for 2 years. During the interview, that's what we were told. And so here we now, all other stuff took place. And so what happened in 2018, we had a lot of severe storms out of Boston Light, and it became no longer livable. So
Risk assessment, they keep ratcheting it up, ratcheting it up, ratcheting it up.
So the Coast Guard went back to Congress and said, hey, we want to be able to transfer this island. And we're responsible for the light at the top of the tower and the fog signal, but this is a landmark as well as a land site. The island is the site in the tower. And there's no funding for that. How can we possibly maintain a historic site?
Doesn't quite fit in the Coast Guard's mission statement.
So Congress concurred, and that's when the Coast Guard moved forward in 2019 to start talking to the public, because it was total outcry, saying, wait a minute, no, Kennedy said that it has to be manned with a Coast Guard presence. Well,
Sally read the fine print.
so Congress said, okie dokie. And then the next thing was going through the Lighthouse Preservation Act to put it out there. And that happened in 2019. What happened in 2020? COVID. So there the brakes went on. So that was for 2 years, but it took the Coast Guard the 3rd year to get their equilibrium to start working on that project again. So with all the delays and what have you, then the Coast Guard said to me, Sally, what are you still doing here? The island's not manned anymore, and we need your GS-11 position, and we're going to change it, and it's going to be for permitting.
Paper pusher.
It's going to be at a computer at Sector Boston doing permitting and other paperwork, and they offered me that job, and I said, no, I don't think so. So they said, well, when are you going to retire? And I said, on my 20th year, or the transfer takes place before. Well, the transfer has yet to happen. So tears in my eye on December 31st of 2023, I stepped down. And it's such a pleasure to have been the first female and be the one bringing closure and able to tell this story. In the press, I got interviewed from all over the world. They already had their story written before they even talked to me. So Jay and I are now on the lecture circuit to get the story straight. And between now and November, we have 20 presentations in libraries from Central Mass over to the East Coast. And that's my therapy.
The other thing that
Be able
Sally
to tell the
didn't
story.
mention is when it came to turning the Lighthouse service over to the GSA, she had to convince the captain of the port and the Rear Admiral of the 1st Coast Guard District. So they actually had a room that had all the paper and history in it, and she had to take and go and convince them it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, so when the Rear Admiral came into the room at Base Boston, there were seats assigned, and I was assigned to sit next to him. And after the whole explanation took place, he turned to me and said, "Sally, do you agree with this?" And I said, 110%. And he said, "Okay." But he came into that room thinking it was going to be a no. He left with a yes. So what it was a project room. And I got pictures from the beginning all the way, from 1716 to, at that time, it was 2019. And so all you had to do is walk around the room and see how the facilities were getting dilapidated, that there just wasn't able to keep up to par as a national landmark. And that's what they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So we didn't have to talk about any particular picture. Everybody just walked around and looked in. And so that fits right into the Lighthouse Preservation Act. And right now, the Park Service wants it again, but the problem is there's mitigation. And the mitigation is there's heavy lead in the ground. So what the Park Service did, I got to go out there in January when I was told, Sally, you're not going to go out there now. The Park Service requested that. I went with them. And so what they need to do is ascertain how much of that's there. And the worst case scenario is that whoever gets the island would need to take all the topsoil off the island to put new ones on. If anybody been out to Boston Light, it's all rocks. The soil is
This
needing
is so the
that
kids
thick.
won't eat the dirt. It's not a child place to begin with. You know what regulations are like.
So right now, that's where it sits. And I don't know where the Park Service is with all of that. If they can mitigate that, then they will be the owner. And the reason why I'm saying that is that's the story they've been telling. So I'm just telling you what they...
You don't suppose that lead came from the battles the island was involved in?
Yeah, I mean, when you think it,
has
everything
deteriorated,
is
you know,
there. Yeah.
the shot. I
So
would bet.
anyway,
But Sally?
moving right along, if you've never been to Little Booster Island, this is what it looks like. 1.5 acres at high tide, 3.5 acres at low tide. There are 6 buildings on the island. And there was a major restoration project in 2014 for our 300th anniversary in 2016. And you know what? It's looking a little, it needs some more. It needs some more work.
You can see the newest building dates to 1899. How many people know the Great Storm of 1898? Portland Gale took out the boathouse.
Sally?
And
Did you tell them how you arrived on the island the day you were commissioned as the new lighthouse keeper?
yes, that's a story into itself, and I will talk to that when we get there.
Okay.
So this is it's a map of the chart with map, not a chart, with a red line on it with the green. The green is all the Boston
Harbor Islands National
National-
and State Park.
Yes. And Little Booster Island is way over there. It's one of those. And that's
Took out
what.
the slide that I put a little blue circle around it to make it easy to see.
So the Park Service, when this Lighthouse Preservation Act was all coming into play and what have you, was that they had to allow the Park Service to bring tours out to Boston Light, because Boston Light was or is one of the 34 islands and peninsulas. And so whenever we give our lectures, the question is, will there ever be tours? Well, whoever gets the island and does the mitigation, they will have to, because it's in the congressional law with the park that Boston Light has to have at least seasonal visitation. And the Coast Guard permitted the agreement between the Park Service and Congress was that it would be Friday, Saturday, and Sundays, 2 tours a day. And that's what we did for a number of years, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And in the beginning, 1994 to 1999, I've been in the Coast Guard Auxiliary for 48 years. Jay's been in for 37, and we met. And Jay had a sailboat down in Plymouth as an operational facility, and my dad and I had one up in Weymouth, so we would take turns. I'd go down to do patrols with him. He'd come up to us for our patrols, and we always just swooped around Boston Light. And I said to Jay, I've always wanted to get married at Boston Light. And Jay said,
Let me know when.
that was the August of 1993. In 1994, in August, just touring by, I said to Jay, is the offer still open?
Yes.
And that was it. Then we had to get a $1 million insurance policy to get married on the island. All the auxiliaries and that didn't. And so here we are, the wedding on Little Booster Island. And this was in 1994 with perms. This was a really bad hairdo.
But considering it was the 4th of October, it was a really great fall day.
And so once we were married, there would be no impropriety for Jay and I to help out of the island. And so we had our first watch out at Boston Light to train as an assistant keeper in November of 1994. And Jay likes to tell
Because
the story.
the story that you know is the active duty was stationed out there. There were 3 active duty. They'd work on a 2-week on, 1 week off rotation. Vacation, sick leave, training. What are they going to do? We can get active duty, reserve. How about this volunteer group we got?
So, so after our first watch in November, we got so excited about we both love maritime history. We said, let's go and find everything we could find out about Boston Light. So 5 years of research, and our friends kept on saying, you got to sandwich that between 2 covers. And we did that in 1999. And here was the kicker. Jay and I were auxiliarists, and we were finding those that are still alive, descendants of the keepers, what have you. And the funny thing is they didn't want to talk to us because we were only auxiliarists. As soon as I got on the payroll in 2003, people came out of the woodwork to tell their stories and what have you. So we could write another book, the same thickness as the first one, without repeating very much. But we met a lot of these descendants over the years, which was, if I hadn't got the job, we wouldn't have captured that history. And then in 2000, well, we have to back up. 1996 is when the Boston Harbor Island National State Park was established. And so the Coast Guard and the Park Service agreed upon, okay, let's do a trial run out to Boston Light in the summer of 1999 to see how it all runs out. So it was just for like 4 or 5 weeks, a test run. And then after that, so I was asked to be part of the committee to assess what that session, those sessions were like. And then, so the Park Service said, we need to have an historical interpreter guide. And so they went to the Coast Guard and said, hey, who has Boston Light history? We need to put a training guide together. And they said, Sally. So they called up Sally and said, Sally, could you give us the history? And I said, well, what are you looking for? And they said, we need a curriculum. Well, I'm a college professor teaching teachers how to teach, and I taught curriculum development. And so I said, I'll write it. And then the Coast Guard, like 3 months later, said, hey, Sally, you know, there's this auxiliarist going out there as being the extra, the warm body when they need another person out of Boston Light. And they said, we want a training manual, because there was no, it was on-the-job training. It was just 3 pages of checklists, you know sounding the oil, cleaning the lens, check, but no description of how to do it. So we already had written the Boston Light book, so extracting things out of that, and then on the Coast Guard side, put together a training manual. And those 2 manuals are still in existence to this day. And so when I got appointed the Boston Light augmentation person, I needed to be able to get the trainees out to the island, and how was I going to do that? So I said to Jay, honey, bunny, this is a 2-year appointment. Can we get a boat? So we got a boat, and we're going to do it for 2 years. It's now 24 years old, in the water, with auxiliary patrol signposts on it. And then there was training. So we trained. And then what has been like being the keeper of Boston Light? Well, let's see. This is our Pavarotti Day in 2003 in September. So here we are, and Jay got a Kuiper and what have you. And the thing is, how are you going to get the keeper to the island? Well, the 36,500 was the transportation. So got picked up at Station Penarlin, onto the boat with the Rear Admiral. And then once we cleared the dock, the person on the helm stepped aside and said, here, you can steer it. How exciting. So I going out, got through Helgot, and we're halfway to the island, and then, the Admiral's standing right here, right? So I stepped aside and let her also at the helm. And once we got there, I had no idea that Jay had the piper, so they were piping us on board. And all the dignitaries that came, it was just totally overwhelming.
Turns out this is just about the same time frame that the Coast Guard was starting their piping. I don't think it was well organized by that time, so I got somebody to come up from Lakeville to pipe them aboard. And as you see, it was a big hit.
Who's the,
All right, and okay, so what's in the future? I thought the future was going to be 18 months, 2 years. Not.
Somebody's question?
who's the admiral? Is it female admiral?
That was Admiral Craig.
Vivian Craig?
Admiral Craig.
Yeah, Admiral Craig. She, yeah. And and so this was, there were 3 keepers out there, a principal keeper and 2 assistant keepers. Well, the principal keeper left in May, and then one of the 3rd class petty officer left in June. That left Ben, the second.
Ben was an unusual petty officer for someone of that young age. He actually loved being out at the light. Most of them, by the time the first week was over, they were ready to get off the island.
So Ben stayed on because I knew how to manage volunteers, recruit, train. I knew, other than what I could catch as catch can over the past 7 years on the facilities part of the job, Ben clued me in on the other stuff that I didn't know about. Talk about overwhelm. And now he's signing papers. He signed up for another 4 years. And
He ended up retiring, and as to quote Ben, he bought the farm up in Berwick, Maine. He put a red roof on it.
And then,
I don't think he made cheap. I think he
no,
made
he
first
didn't
class.
want that. He
He didn't
stayed,
want the paperwork.
I remember him saying he didn't want to make first class because it was too much responsibility. He liked second class because there was a whole bunch of stuff you could do, but once you went first class, you had to like major in something. All right, so what did we do? Getting there. This is what the island looked like. It still looks like this. And the boat comes up against the pier to unload. And one of the
And you
things...
folks can probably appreciate the size of the fenders we have on this little 20-foot center console.
And I loved to bring flowers out to the island. The only ones that survived were marigolds. So every mid-May, we would bring out the marigolds. And we...
Except for the season we planted them and realized that the soil had got prickled from the winter storms and we had to replace the soil and the marigolds.
And so the Park Service that wanted to go to get visitors to the island, they had to come up with a platform to do it. And so they built a $1.8 million dock system with a piling set of 50-foot dock, only 10 feet wide, and a gangway. Not very stable. We won't get into that story. And this was just seasonal. It would only be out maybe 15 weeks out of the summer. This is one of my favorite pictures. When you're at the West End of the island, you're looking at the keeper's house that I lived in this seasonally. The boathouse that Jay said is the newest building on the island in 1899, and the tower with the flagpole.
Oh, yeah.
And this is, people say, well, what do you do for water? Okay, do
We knew for a long time that you're not going to drink the water from the cistern.
Yeah. So we don't have piping from the town of Hull. We do have electricity, but not water. So how do we get potable water? Well, Jay and Sally go to Simpson Spring in Easton, Massachusetts, pick up the bottles, put them in the SUV, bring them to Turn Harbor Marina in Weymouth, put it on the boat, go out to Boston Light, unload it on a high tide, and take it off the boat, and then get it in the cellar of the keeper's house. So when auxiliaries were signing up for duty, they'd say, when is that water going to come out to the island? Because they would avoid whatever those dates were. And here we are getting the garden ready. And we mowed the lawn. And Jay loves this picture. You can tell this story.
We have our own sewage treatment plant out at Little Brewster Island. We're not connected to the Deer Island plant. And regulations coming up. DEP was coming and kept on cranking up the regulations. Well, they had to take and have somebody come out and do testing during the summer when we were out there. And part of that was
Scooping the poop out of the sewage treatment plant that hadn't been processed. So the third party would come out and test, take samples, and then
they take the bucket away.
and then they take the bucket. So I would have to clean it out every week, and they would take the poop buckets and bring me clean buckets. And auxiliaries actually volunteered to do that. I wouldn't let them do it. I mean, that was just a little bit too much for them.
But the other thing, since '94 when we started going out there, neither of us ever saw an active duty doing that.
All right, and we have to, yes.
Was there a poop deck?
We had a tractor out there, and auxiliaries would come out to keep it up and running for us. We would, the handrail broke and using a nylon spike to put it back together. And at the storm in 2018 that I mentioned, we lost a lot of shingles. It was really windy. We had a new door that we needed for the porch, and it had to be cut to fit perfectly in there. And Jay and Jim worked on that project. And then we have how many have been out to Boston Light? So you know there's a red thing there. It's a 1927 vintage Daytona. And it gets rusty. We have to sand it down and paint it. You should see it now. And one of the things I love to do is clean the lens. And this is our cistern. This is the cistern building. See how big the roof is? So it can maximize the amount of water that's collected. But birds fly up on there, and they do their duty, and it gets washed down into the cistern building. So that's why we don't drink it. We use it for like washing and things like that.
Until they cranked up the regulations and said you can't even do that.
And how we get the water from there to the house is we get fire hoses, and we connect it, and we take it, it's about 300 feet.
Yeah. When we first started, it was a sump pump and garden hoses. And then we transferred to the real world, and we got a full sand filter and put the fire hoses. So instead of taking like 3 or 4 hours, it took maybe 20 minutes to 3/4 of an hour.
It took longer to unroll the fire hoses and roll them up than it did to put the water. And see that yellow helicopter? Does anyone know, is it still yellow? Yellow helicopter. Coast Guard yellow.
It
It's
was
still
done
yellow.
as for a specific purpose.
It's at the air station. They only pull it out, in fact, they'll probably pull it out this weekend because it's the anniversary.
And so we were having our generator removed from the island, and this was the helicopter. It's the only yellow one in the entire country. It's so special. And when there were tours, 2000 to 2017, right, we used the boathouse as our welcome center. And these are just pictures of what it looked like. And it was the safety message, where it's safe to walk around and where it's not. And this is a time when the visitors were allowed to climb the 76 spiral stairs and the ladder and the second ladder up to the lantern room. Anybody do that here? No. Okay, yeah. And so you can't touch the lens. It's glass. So if you put your fingers on it, it leaves oil behind it. And then the sun gets on it and it can cause it to crack, bubble, or discolor. So I would always say to the visitors, if you don't know what to do with your hands, put them in your pockets. If you don't have pockets, pretend you do. And then I'd be in the kitchen with binoculars looking up at the tower and see people touching it. Now there's a ranger up there. Why doesn't the ranger know this? And I'd have to hold my tongue because I had a walkie-talkie. The person with a striped pink shirt stopped touching the lips.
That's why she's a caper. I wouldn't have been able to keep my mouth shut.
That's why we had to clean the lens, because when you're having people up and down, raising the dust, and then it settles. So we had to. Then once they get their little.
The question was, do we still have the curtains? Yes. But you don't want to take and let the spring work on them, because it's like a house curtain. You unroll them and hang them up, because otherwise they'll pop off and damage the lens.
It's not a curtain, it's shades. And so once they get their introduction, they get to walk around the island. Many places what you would do is they put you in little groups and walk you around. We just gave them the safety spiel and let them meander around. If they wanted to talk with the interps, they could. If they didn't, they wouldn't. Other than when you go up to the tower, you have to listen to them. And then we had a tour in the morning, tour in the afternoon, and we would get what we call drive-bys. I couldn't believe the number of kayaks that were coming out there between the two tours. We were exhausted. You'd think that, oh yeah, you have an hour and a half before the next tour comes. No. And so we have the boathouse, we have the beach, and between low tide and in mid-tide, it's great to go down there to see all the critters. And that was a good place for the little kids to go because there wasn't really a whole much for them to do here.
Didn't have to worry about lead paint down there.
And so this is a group of people that walked over to the cistern building, and whoever was the interp for that station would answer questions, show a chart, point out the other two lighthouses in the harbor.
And the mushroom anchor was from one of the lightships back when it was the U.S. Lighthouse establishment.
And then they go home. The boat they use is the Columbia Point. It's the UMass Boston's Marine Division. They have, so this boat is not only the research vessel, but they also lease it out. So part of the partnership for the Boston Harbor Islands National Park is UMass Boston with the Columbia Point.
And you can see why we were always nervous when they were coming and going.
Yeah, we wouldn't have more than 6 passengers on the dock at the time, and we'd have 2 auxiliaries to help. Weather at all. So here we have beautiful day out in Boston Light. And then we have the pond. Look at the seas
You
here.
can see why we didn't get off the boat.
Yeah, Station Point Island. We were able to do winter watches up to 2013. Just go away to the south. And they brought us out there. There was no way. That was the 41-footer. They said, we're not getting near that. So we went back. And this is the storm. And this. And this. And this, I mean, look at the cookie pond. So this was from 2018. And it was because of all this damage that the Coast Guard had a full facility inspection. They got the big mucky mucks on the East Coast from wherever their headquarters is down in North Carolina or something. And that report was not very pretty. And that's when...
Wasn't that different than the report that was done about 5 years earlier? But, you know, risk management.
So I was told in March of 2019, Sally, you cannot live out there this summer. I was out there 5.5 months out of the year. And that's when they went to Congress to see if they could unman the island and go forth with the Lighthouse presentation.
Where else did you volunteer to pitch rocks?
So in 2018, it was a lot of rocks to pitch and to picture that bridge we had. Some tried to use the rake to pick it up, and these two, they came all the way up from Florida to do a watch, pitch rocks off the island. They're still there.
We throw them back, they come back. Throw them in, they come back.
And then home away from home, people say, well, what does it look like inside the keeper's house? Well, this is the kitchen. This kitchen chair here is where I sat with the binoculars, looking up at the tower, watching the visitors touch the And a lighthouse story is not complete without knowing that the Black Lab is the Coast Guard's mascot. So this is the last Coast Guard lighthouse mascot, Sammy. And he was quite the trooper. This was his third billing. His first was at Scituate Station, and they went to Station Small, and so they couldn't take the dog. Oh no, the first one, yeah.
No, that
and then
was
it
the
went to
first
the
one.
radio. Marshfield has
There's
a
a
radio.
repeater station down in Marshfield.
And then that went day duty. So they brought it into Base Boston. And Base Boston said, you can't have that dog on here. Get this dog off the property. And so one of the coasties called out to the light at the time. It was Scott Stanton, who was the keeper, and said, hey, how would you like a black lab dog? A Coast Guard dog came from Scituate and from Marshfield. And he said, oh, yeah, I was thinking about, I'd like to have a dog out here. So they got a 41-footer, got Sammy on it, came from Boston, brought it out to Boston Light, leaped off the bow of the boat, and boy, was he
One
happy.
happy
Didn't have to
dog.
be on a leash anymore. and he died in 2004, the day after our last tour. So that last year, he would just lay on the ground. He loved kids. So kids would, crawl over him, pat him, and things like that. But he'd always come down to the pier, or at the end of the pier, when people were coming and going. The next day, Jay and I took our boat into Boston because I had to check my emails at Boston, and we came back. Sammy didn't come down, and I said to Jay, this is not a good sign. Sammy had passed away on the lawn while we was on. Wasn't it a trooper? He made it through the year. And we dug a pretty big hole, and he is out.
He was about, the question was how old was Sammy? He was about 14, which was a pretty good age for a black lab, and if you know his history, it's even more amazing.
So he came out when he was 7, and he died at 14. And then, the wonderful experiences I had at the Boston. Yo-Yo Ma came out with his whole orchestra. The Park Service wanted to have recorded this land is your land, this land is mine, from all over the country. And so they wanted an artist from that area. So it was Boston, and Yo-Yo Ma said, I'll do that. So this was an amazing day. I mean, there was no dock at this time. It was up and down the ladder. And he came out with his cello. But I found out later it wasn't his performance cello, it was a beat-up cello. But to be on the island with 75 people out there playing that music, it was amazing.
And I still haven't seen the clip of it.
And there's a young Ma up at the Lantern Room who gave a Boston license.
Did he touch the lens?
We had an auxiliarist pass away, Connie Reynolds, in 2004. She spent a lot of time doing watch standing whenever her schedule permitted to. And so we had a little ceremony for it, and we had a plaque. And one of the things she'd always say is, Sally, can we wear your costume when you're on the island? And I said, no. And she said, well, why not? And I said, the get-up serves a purpose. Believe it or not, I am an introvert. I do not want to be recognized in the general public. So this was my way of being incognito, and I wasn't going to share it. So we decided, I said, how about if we could all take a dress? And so we're a little plaque here, and there we are, the women that were out there for the day in the different costumes. People ask about my dress. I made, I think, 24 of them. And then we had Channel 5 do AccuWeather on the island. Oh my gosh, was that fun. And he was afraid of heights. And the photographer...
The cameraman talked him up into climbing the tower
went
and being out on the gallery to do the weather report.
with his hands, knuckles, to do the weather report. That was a lot. And then down at the bottom right, this old house was we're doing a house in Boston, and they like to go to a historic place. They came out here, and so there is the person interviewing me. And then we have the first keeper of Boston Light was George Worthylake. He didn't last very long, 2.5 years. He drowned with his wife, a daughter, a slave, and a friend. And this is the Worthylake clan. They had the young little baby, so we have the first keeper, Worthylake, and that was fun. And then we also had weddings out there. The Park Service,
They didn't have to pay the $1 million insurance policy. The National Park Service covered it.
and it didn't cost them anything except for the boat ride out there. And I saved the baby seal. It was, the tide was going out, and the mama seal was, get off the wreck, get off the box. And
You know how kids don't listen. It doesn't matter what age.
so it swam away, the tide went out, it was stuck up there. So I got this brainstorm. Got a bucket of water and pour buckets and let it slide down. And there I am with the buckets. It slid down and it walked across the rocks into the bag. And the mama took one look at her and put her nose up in the air and swam off. And the baby followed her. Ah, yes. Sailboats tried to cut between Little and Great Brewster Island. They do it today. Doesn't matter, GPS, paper charts. But this happened in the afternoon of a tour. It was on a Saturday. And there were a lot of staff that was hanging around. And I said, let's yell and scream and go like this. So there was like 7 of us going like this. The next thing you hear was a crunch. That boat didn't get off there until 1 o'clock in the morning.
I mean, if you don't read a chart, you don't know about the tide either. So you go aground on a falling tide.
So Station Chronolodan said, there's 2 people out there, right? Yourself and another auxiliarist. And I said, yes. They will do a watch. So we took turns sleeping for an hour, watching for an hour, sleeping for a while. And then telling the station that, yeah, they're still in the cockpit. And for this one, there was we had some storms in 2013, and there's an oil line that runs from the middle of the island to the keeper's house, and it got compromised. So when I went out to do a watch, there was oil, and it resulted in needing to take all the, we have no fuel on the island. We do not have a generator.
Another picture of the yellow helicopter. We had a generator with like 20 hours or something on it. No fuel, that's why they took it away.
And then we had our 300th anniversary with all the buildings had a this is a lens at 9 feet tall, 336 individual prisoners. We put in here 1859. And then I love this picture because it shows the height of the favorite pictures. We get to walk across over to Great Brewster, so this picture was taken on the island. We have ceremonies out there. And Christmas time, we have lights at the top, flying Santa. And we have flying Santa. This was last December. We have Captain Benson with us, and Brian Kay, and Santa, and me. So that's the last time. That was it. And in the end, bringing closure to the last man, woman, took up by station in the United States. And this was a ceremony that they had for me in December at the base. This is my favorite picture. This was by U.S. Postal Service. The stamp. They had a New England stamp. There were 5 of them. And so they had a photographer come, and this is the picture that they did. Sunset. And this is what the backup lights look like when the light's not working. There's a story.
You were asking about the shades?
Yeah.
You can see the shades are there. Yeah, we only put them where we needed them. Oh, we missed that question.
13,000 foot extension cord from Windmill Point. And it was supposed to be replaced in 2004. And it is now 2024.
So I need to put an antidote to that, because I used to take care of Coast Guard housing. And we had those 8 buildings on the avenue up there. And I got a call from the people at the Hull Light Company, and they said, you have a house on Nantasket Avenue, blah, 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 blah. They gave me a number, and I said, no, we don't have anything like that. I said, well, we're paying a bill for somebody and we don't know who it is. And it turned out that because they had to have an address, which there was no address for Boston Light, they made up an address.
I thought you were going to say they didn't have an address for the housing unit. Yeah, we got free electricity for quite a while, and then you were around, I guess, when the details caught up.
And that's it, folks.
You now understand why. You now understand why it was a privilege to invite Sally. I said we've been friends for 30 years, but she's my go-to source for information. I have some facts that I've talked about. Jane will confirm that sometimes I put facts out that aren't necessarily accurate all the time. But there were several people, Dave Waldrop, Joe, neighborhood southern. What? No.
It happens a lot to us nowadays.
It's my name, I need to remember, Joe. That are Lighthouse people and sources, but I'll tell you two very, very quick stories. One, Sally, one of the things I was always promoting was that the oldest Coast Guard artifact was out of Boston Light. It was a cannon, it was not sound signal, it's a cannon. And that it was made in Cohasset in 1700 or shortly before. It turns out that wasn't true. That it wasn't. Maybe initially it was the cannon was out there, but it was replaced sometime before the Civil War. So I go to her for fact finding. I'll add one more thing that I find interesting. That I think it came out. You could see it there. Jade mentioned some too. The Harbor Islands are initially called, maybe they have a different name. Initially, it's called the National Park Recreation Area. It was unique. There are no islands, no land out there that's owned by a national park, but it's a national park jurisdiction. The Coast Guard owns a couple islands out there, Little Brewster being one of those. State and town own others, but it is interesting in that it's a cooperative process. I was on the advisory board for quite a while out there, so became very familiar. It's a great place for those who haven't been out there. Good place to go visit. That said, we've got about 5 minutes before first call to colors, and then another 5 to 10 minutes. So if we do it right this moment,
Can I add
I'm sorry?
Nick, over here, Nancy.
Can
Can I add something, just that their book about Boston Light is so full of technical information. It's a wonderful book.
If you've got
Buy it.
insomnia, it's good to go to sleep by.
Just quickly, if we can go inside for a second, I'm going to ask Sally to ceremonially cut the cake briefly. We're not going to give it out. We'll immediately go back outside and get ready for evening colors. Then come back in and get your cake. And eat it too.